The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Chicago skyline as passengers filed into Gate C-17. Flight 2187 to San Francisco was boarding, and people shuffled forward with their carry-ons and tired eyes. Some chatted excitedly about California, adventures ahead, while others just wanted to get through the 6-hour journey without any hassle. Among the crowd stood a 12-year-old boy with bright, curious eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Michael Turner stood close to his mother, Lisa, as they waited to board. Unlike most kids his age who would be glued to a phone or game, Michael watched the ground crew load luggage and prepare the Boeing 737 with genuine interest. "Do you think we'll be able to see the Grand Canyon from up there?" Michael asked, tugging at his mother's sleeve. Lisa smiled down at her son. "I'm not sure, honey. It might be a bit too far south of our route." She adjusted the strap of her eBird bag and moved forward in line. "Remember to thank your Aunt Patricia when we land. She's the one who paid for these tickets." Michael nodded, but his attention had already drifted back to the massive aircraft visible through the terminal windows. His uncle Raymond was a flight instructor back home, and ever since Michael was 8, he'd been fascinated by planes. While other kids played video games, Michael spent countless hours on flight simulators under his uncle's guidance, learning about control systems and navigation methods. "Next 3 passengers, please," called the gate agent. Lisa handed over their boarding passes, and minutes later, they were walking down the jetway and onto the plane. Michael ran his hand along the cool metal of the fuselage as they stepped aboard, feeling the gentle vibration of the auxiliary power unit. "Welcome aboard." A flight attendant greeted them with a practiced smile. "Seats 14B and C are down to." "You're right, about halfway down the cabin." Michael slid into the window seat, immediately pressing his face against the plexiglass to watch the activity on the tarmac. His mother settled in beside him, already pulling out a novel from her purse. "Remember what Uncle Ray says about takeoff," Michael recited to himself quietly. "Positive rate of climb, gear up, flaps up gradually." In the cockpit, Captain Thomas Reynolds ran through his pre-flight checklist with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this thousands of times. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and steady hands, Reynolds had logged over 20,000 flight hours during his 15-year career. Today's flight to San Francisco was as routine as they came. "Weather looks clear all the way through," noted First Officer Alicia Chen, a capable pilot 10 years his junior. "Should be smooth sailing today." Reynolds nodded as he adjusted his headset. "Let's hope so. My daughter's birthday is tomorrow and I promised I'd be back in time." The boarding process completed, the cabin doors were sealed, and the jetway pulled back. Reynolds' deep voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard Flight 2187 with an estimated flying time of 5 hours and 53 minutes. The safety demonstration began as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Michael ignored the demonstration. He'd practically memorized it already. Instead, he watched the flaps extend and retract during the pre-flight check, naming each part, under his breath as if he were the one performing the inspection. "You really love this stuff, don't you?" Lisa remarked, glancing up from her book. "It's the best thing ever," Michael replied without taking his eyes off the wing. "Uncle Ray says I've got natural talent. Says I could be a pilot someday if I keep at it." The powerful engines roared to life and the aircraft began its taxi to the runway. Michael felt that familiar flutter of excitement in his stomach as they lined up for takeoff. Then came the surge of acceleration, pushing him back into his seat as the plane thundered down the runway before lifting gracefully into the morning sky. "Look, Mom, see how the city gets smaller?" Michael pointed as Chicago began to shrink beneath them. "And see the lake? That's why they call it the blue water effect in aviation, when you can see the difference between land and water from above." Lisa smiled at her son's enthusiasm, though she herself gripped the armrests a little tighter during the steep climb. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, she relaxed somewhat. The first 2 hours of the flight passed without incident. Flight attendants served drinks and snacks, passengers dozed or worked on laptops, and the quiet hum of the engines provided a steady background noise. Michael had been keeping himself busy by tracking their route on the in-flight map, occasionally making notes in a small pad he'd brought along. "Did you know we're flying at 36,000 feet right now?" he told his mother. "That's nearly 7 miles up." "Is that right?" Lisa responded, only half listening as she turned a page in her book. "Yep, and we're going about 550 miles per hour. Uncle," Ray says. Michael's aviation lesson was interrupted by a sudden jolt as the aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence. Drinks splashed and a few passengers gasped. The seatbelt sign immediately illuminated with a chime. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. "We've hit some unexpected rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts until we're through this patch." The turbulence lasted only a few minutes before the flight smoothed out again. Most passengers returned to their activities, but Michael noticed something odd. The plane was maintaining altitude, but their heading had changed slightly. He checked the in-flight map again, confirming they had deviated from their planned route. Probably avoiding more turbulence, he muttered to himself, recalling his uncle's lessons about weather systems and flight planning. Another hour passed. They were now halfway to San Francisco, cruising over the vast plains of Nebraska. Michael had finally gotten bored with the flight map and was flipping through a magazine when he noticed a flight attendant hurrying up the aisle with a concerned expression. Minutes later, the same attendant rushed back the other way with the first aid kit. "Something's wrong," Michael said, sitting up straighter. "What do you mean?" Lisa looked up from her book. Before Michael could answer, the plane banked suddenly to the left, causing several passengers to look up in confusion. In the cockpit, disaster had struck without warning. Captain Reynolds had been mid-sentence during a routine communication with air traffic control when he suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. The healthy, experienced pilot gasped for air, then slumped forward against his harness. "Tom? Tom?" First Officer Chen reached over, her training kicking in even as panic threatened to overwhelm her. She checked his pulse, weak and irregular. "Mayday, mayday," she radioed to air traffic control. "This is Flight 2187. Captain is experiencing a medical emergency. I am declaring an emergency." Chen pressed the intercom button. "This is First Officer Chen. I need a flight attendant in the cockpit immediately." Lead flight attendant Daniel Park rushed to the cockpit while his colleagues began checking for medical professionals among the passengers. "The captain's had some kind of cardiac event," Chen explained quickly to Park. "I need you to help me while I fly the plane. We need to divert to the nearest suitable airport." Park nodded grimly. "I'll get the medical kit and oxygen. Should I ask for a doctor over the intercom?" "Yes, and hurry." Park's voice came over the speakers moments later, trying to sound calm but unable to hide the urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation on board. If there is a doctor, nurse, or anyone with medical training on the flight, please press your call button immediately." Throughout the cabin, anxious murmurs spread like wildfire. 3 call buttons lit up, and flight attendants quickly escorted a retired nurse, a medical student, and a paramedic to the cockpit. In row 14, Michael's mind was racing. He'd noticed the sudden change in altitude and the unusual bank angle. These weren't normal flight patterns. When he heard the call for medical help, he remembered all the emergency scenarios his uncle had walked him through on the simulator. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think something's happened to the pilot." Lisa looked at her son with concern. "What makes you say that?" "The way we're flying. And they wouldn't ask for a doctor unless someone was really sick. Plus, we're descending now. Look." He pointed to the flight map showing their altitude gradually decreasing. First Officer Chen was performing admirably under pressure, but she was now facing a terrible dilemma. With the captain incapacitated and receiving emergency care, she was alone at the controls. Flight regulations required 2 people in the cockpit at all times, but all 3 flight attendants were now needed in the cabin to manage increasingly anxious passengers. Park returned to the cockpit briefly. "The nurse says it looks like a severe heart attack. She's doing what she can, but the captain needs a hospital as soon as possible." Chen nodded grimly. "We're diverting to Denver. ETA 35 minutes. But Daniel, I need someone in here with me. It's protocol, and honestly, I could use the help with communications while I focus on flying." Park looked around desperately, All his colleagues were fully occupied managing the growing panic in the cabin. "Let me think," he said, running a hand through his hair. "There must be someone." The intercom crackled to life again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen's voice was steady despite her stress. "This is First Officer Chen speaking. Due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please remain calm and follow all crew insti. Ructions. We expect to land in approximately 35 minutes. The announcement only increased the tension in the cabin. Some passengers began to cry, while others demanded more information from the overwhelmed flight attendants as Michael listened to the frightened voices around him. A strange calm settled over him. He thought of all those hours in the simulator with Uncle Ray, all the emergency procedures they'd practiced together, all the times his uncle had said, "Keep your head when everyone else is losing theirs." He unbuckled his seatbelt. "Michael, what are you doing?" Lisa grabbed his arm. "The seatbelt sign is on. Mom, I need to tell them something," he said with a certainty that surprised even himself. "I think I can help." Michael made his way toward the front of the plane, ignoring his mother's protests. Flight attendants were rushing back and forth, trying to calm passengers while also helping with the medical emergency. The retired nurse and paramedic had been escorted to where Captain Reynolds was now lying on the floor of the cockpit, receiving emergency care. "Excuse me," Michael said, trying to get the attention of a harried flight attendant named Tyler who was reassuring an elderly couple. "Excuse me, I need to talk to someone in charge." Tyler barely glanced at Michael. "Please return to your seat." "Young man, we have an emergency situation." "That's what I want to help with," Michael insisted. "My uncle is a flight instructor. I know about planes." Tyler was already moving on to the next row of concerned passengers. "That's nice, but you need to sit down now." Lisa had followed her son and grabbed his shoulder. "Michael, what are you doing? You're making things worse. Come back to your seat." Michael turned to his mother with an expression she'd never seen before, a strange mixture of determination and certainty beyond his years. "Mom, I know I can help. They need someone in the cockpit. It's the rules. 2 people have to be there and all the flight attendants are busy." "You're 12 years old," Lisa whispered harshly, not wanting to draw more attention. "What could you possibly do?" Before Michael could answer, the lead flight attendant Daniel Park emerged from the cockpit looking frazzled. He immediately began conferring with his colleagues, his voice low but urgent. Michael pulled away from his mother and approached him. "Sir," Michael said, his voice clear and steady despite the chaos around them. "I can help in the cockpit." Park looked down at the boy with confusion. "What? Kid, go back to your seat. This is serious." "I know it's serious," Michael replied. "That's why I'm offering to help. My uncle Raymond Turner is a certified flight instructor out of O'Hare. He's been teaching me on simulators for 4 years. I know the basics of this aircraft model, the Boeing 737-800. Park's expression changed from dismissal to surprise. "How did you know this was a 737-800? The engine cowling shape, the winglets, and the cabin configuration," Michael answered without hesitation. "Plus, I checked the safety card earlier." Lisa caught up with her son again. "I'm so sorry about this. Michael, come back right now." "Mom, please." Michael turned to her. "Remember last summer when Uncle Ray let me handle almost the entire simulated flight from Chicago to Detroit? He said I did better than some of his adult students." Park looked from the boy to his mother, desperation beginning to override skepticism. "Ma'am, is what he's saying true? About his uncle being a flight instructor?" Lisa nodded reluctantly. "Yes, my brother Raymond has been teaching Michael on flight simulators since he was 8. He's obsessed with aviation, but he's still just a child." The plane experienced another bout of turbulence, causing everyone to brace themselves. Park made a quick decision. "Come with me," he said to Michael. "Just to talk to the first officer, nothing more." They moved toward the cockpit, with Lisa following closely behind, insisting she wouldn't let her son out of her sight. When they reached the cockpit door, Park entered his security code and opened it just enough to speak with First Officer Chen. "Alicia, there's..." Well, there's a boy here who says he might be able to help. His uncle is apparently a flight instructor, and the kid claims to have simulator experience. Chen looked up from the controls, her expression a mixture of disbelief and desperation. A child? Are you serious, Daniel? Michael stepped forward before Park could answer. I know about the required dual control inputs for landing. I understand. About flap settings and approach speeds. I've practiced emergency procedures on simulators. Chen stared at the boy, then at the controls, then at Captain Reynolds, who was now receiving oxygen from the medical team cramped in the back of the cockpit. She had been trying to handle flying the plane while also managing communications with air traffic control and coordinating the emergency landing in Denver. It was too much for one person. What's your name? She asked finally. Michael Turner. How old are you, Michael? 12. But I've logged over 200 hours on flight simulators with my uncle. I know that's not the same as real flying, but I understand the principles and procedures. Chen took a deep breath, weighing her options. The situation was unprecedented. Having a child in the cockpit during an emergency went against every protocol, but so did flying without a second person at the controls. Mrs. Turner, Chen addressed Lisa, who stood pale-faced behind her son. I'm not going to let him fly the plane, but I do need someone to help me with communications and to monitor some instruments while I focus on flying. If what he says is true, he might actually be helpful. Lisa looked torn. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. Then stronger. I'm coming in there with him. There's no room, Chen replied, gesturing to the tight space already crowded with medical personnel attending to the captain. And regulations strictly limit cockpit access. Mom, Michael said, turning to face her. I'll be okay. It's just like Uncle Ray's simulator. Remember how he always said I have a gift for this? Lisa looked at her son, seeing both the child she wanted to protect and something else, a capability she hadn't fully acknowledged before. After a moment, she nodded slowly. You do exactly what she tells you. Nothing more, she told Michael, firmly. And you, she said to First Officer Chen, you keep my son safe. That's my primary job for everyone on this aircraft, ma'am, Chen replied solemnly. With that, Michael entered the cockpit, and the door closed behind him. Lisa stood frozen in the galley, unable to believe what had just happened. Park gently guided her back to her seat, promising to keep her updated. Inside the cockpit, Michael took in the situation quickly. The cockpit was smaller than he'd imagined from his simulator experiences. Captain Reynolds was lying on the floor behind the seats, attended to by the retired nurse who was monitoring his pulse and keeping his airway clear. The paramedic had set up a portable oxygen system and was communicating quietly with medical services on the ground via one of the flight attendants. Sit there, Chen instructed, pointing to the captain's vacant seat. Don't touch any controls, unless I specifically tell you to, understood? Yes, ma'am, Michael replied, carefully settling into the seat that was much too large for him. He buckled the harness and looked at the instrument panel. It was similar to what he'd practiced on, but with more buttons and screens than his uncle's simulator. Denver approach, this is Flight 2187, Chen was saying into her headset. We have a medical emergency with the captain. I am currently the only certified pilot in command. We will need medical staff standing by. ETA 28 minutes. She turned to Michael. I need you to keep an eye on these gauges, she pointed to a section of the instrument panel. Tell me immediately if any of these values change or if any warning lights come on. Michael nodded, focusing intently on the instruments. What's our current altitude? He asked. We're at 28,000 feet, descending at 2,500 feet per minute, Chen replied, somewhat surprised by the professional tone of the question. And our heading? 95, but we'll be turning to 120 for the approach to Denver. Michael nodded again. Should I monitor communications with Denver while you focus on flying? Chen gave him a sideways glance. You know how to operate the radio? My uncle showed me. You press this to transmit. He pointed to a button on the control yoke. Careful not to actually touch it. And these are the frequency selectors. He indicated the correct controls on the console. Despite the gravity of the situation, Chen felt a flicker of astonishment. The boy really did know what he was talking about. All right, yes, monitor the communications. Let me know immediately if Denver calls. For the next 10 minutes, they worked together in this strange partnership. Michael kept his eyes on the instruments, occasionally relaying messages from air traffic control. Chen handled the aircraft with skill, but the stress of the situation was evident in the tightness around her eyes. There's weather developing near Denver, she muttered, more to herself than to Michael. We might have to adjust our approach. Michael glanced at the weather radar display. The storm cell is moving northeast at approximately 15 knots, he observed. If we approach from the southwest instead, we might avoid the worst of it. Chen looked at him sharply. How do you know how to read a weather radar? Uncle Ray says, weather is one of the most important things for pilots to understand. Michael answered simply. We practice interpreting radar images all the time. For the first time since the emergency began, Chen felt a small measure of relief. The boy wasn't just repeating memorized procedures. He actually understood what he was seeing. Denver approach is suggesting runway 26R, Michael reported after listening to a new communication. They say it will keep us clear of the developing thunderstorm. Chen nodded. That makes sense. Tell them we, accept runway 26R and request the latest wind information. Michael carefully pressed the transmit button. Denver approach flight 2187 accepts runway 26R, requesting current wind conditions at the field. The controller's voice came back almost immediately. Flight 2187, winds at Denver currently 260 at 12 knots, gusting to 18. Altimeter 2992, winds 260 at 12, gusting 18. Altimeter 2992, Michael repeated, then looked to Chen for confirmation. She nodded her approval. You've done this before. Only in simulators, Michael reminded her. But Uncle Ray always says to treat the simulator like it's real. Your uncle sounds like a good instructor, Chen said, making another adjustment to their descent rate. The cabin, the passengers had been informed they would be landing in Denver due to a medical emergency. Most had assumed it was another passenger who was ill, not the captain himself. Lisa sat rigidly in her seat, her novel forgotten, praying silently for everyone's safety, especially her son's. Excuse me, she called to Tyler as he passed by, her row. Any update from the cockpit? My son is up there. Tyler paused. They're preparing for landing in Denver. Everything is under control. He didn't sound entirely convinced of his own words. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Through the windows, passengers could see they were descending through clouds, occasionally hitting patches of turbulence that caused the plane to shake. Back in the cockpit, Michael and First Officer Chen were preparing for the approach to Denver. The captain's condition had stabilized somewhat thanks to the efforts of the medical team, but he remained unconscious. We're 10,000 feet, speed 250 knots, Michael reported, watching the altimeter. Denver has emergency vehicles standing by. Chen nodded, her focus absolute as she guided the massive aircraft toward the runway that was still invisible beneath the clouds. We'll be breaking through the cloud layer soon. I need you to watch for the runway lights once we do. Yes, ma'am, Michael replied. Then after a moment's hesitation, First Officer Chen? Yes? You're doing a great job, he said simply. Chen glanced at the boy beside her, this strange, calm child who had appeared like some kind of miracle when she needed help most. So are you, Michael. So are you. The aircraft descended through thick clouds, occasionally bumping in turbulence that made the overhead bins rattle. In the passenger cabin, the anxiety was palpable. People gripped their armrests. Some prayed quietly. Others tried to distract themselves by staring at the seatback screens that now displayed nothing but the flight map showing their diverted route to Denver. Lisa Turner sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The mother of 3 had faced many challenges in her life. Raising Michael largely on her own after her husband's death 5 years ago had been the hardest. But nothing compared to the helplessness she felt now, knowing her young son was in the cockpit of a troubled flight. He'll be okay, whispered the elderly woman next to her, patting Lisa's arm. Children are often braver than we give them credit for. Lisa managed a weak smile. Michael has always been different, she said, almost to herself. Always so focused when it comes to planes. I never thought his hobby would matter like this. In the cockpit, that very hobby had transformed into something far more consequential. Michael kept his eyes fixed on the instruments, monitoring their descent with a concentration that belied his age. First Officer Chen handled the controls with precision, her years of training evident in every small adjustment she made. 5,000 feet, Michael announced. Descending through clouds. Visibility still limited. Chen nodded, her attention split between flying the plane and monitoring their approach path on the instruments. Flaps 5, she instructed, reaching for the flap lever. Michael watched carefully. Flaps moving to position 5, he confirmed as the indicators showed the wing flaps extending to their intermediate position. The slight change in the aircraft's sound and feel was exactly as he remembered from the simulator. Behind them, the medical team continued to tend to Captain Reynolds. His condition had stabilized, but he remained unconscious, his breathing shallow. Denver Tower, Flight 2187, passing through 4,000 feet, on approach for runway 26R, Chen reported. The radio crackled with the tower controller's response. Flight 2187, Denver Tower, winds now 270 at 15 knots, gusting 20. You are cleared to land runway 26R. Emergency vehicles are standing by. Michael relayed the updated wind information to Chen. That crosswind is getting stronger, he observed, remembering his uncle's lessons about landing in challenging conditions. Chen gave him a quick glance. You're right. We'll need to crab into the wind on final approach. Just then, the plane broke through the cloud layer and the sprawling landscape of the Denver area came into view. The Rocky Mountains loomed majestically in the distance, but neither Michael nor Chen had time to appreciate the scenery. Their focus was entirely on the approaching runway, now visible as a gray strip in the distance. I see the runway, Michael said, leaning forward slightly in his seat. Good. Keep watching it and monitor our alignment, Chen instructed, making a small adjustment to their heading to account for the crosswind. In the cabin, passengers felt the distinctive sensation of the landing gear deploying with a mechanical rumble. The plane's nose dipped slightly as Chen configured the aircraft for its final approach. Gear down and locked, Michael confirmed, checking the indicators. 3,000 feet, speed 170 knots, flaps 15. Chen worked the controls with practiced hands, managing the aircraft's energy as they descended toward the runway. The turbulence had increased, making the approach more challenging, but her flying remained steady and precise. 2,000 feet, Michael continued his callouts. On glide path. Slight right crosswind. A particularly strong gust hit the aircraft, causing it to yaw suddenly. Chen corrected immediately, compensating for the wind while maintaining their approach path. Nicely done, Michael said without thinking. Despite the intense concentration, on her face, Chen's lips curved in the slightest smile. Thanks, co-pilot. The term struck Michael with unexpected force. Co-pilot. Of course he wasn't really one. He was just a kid who liked flight simulators. But in this moment, with the lives of nearly 200 people depending partly on him doing his job correctly, it felt real. 1,000 feet, he announced, his voice steady. Continuing approach, runway in sight. The airport was growing larger in the windscreen, the details of the terminal buildings and surrounding taxiways becoming clearer. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their red and blue lights flashing even in the daylight. Flight 2187, winds shifting, now 280 at 17 knots, gusting 22, came the tower's update. Chen absorbed this information without comment, making another small adjustment to their approach angle. The crosswind was significant but still within the aircraft's capabilities. 500 feet, Michael called out. Speed 145 knots, on center line. In the passenger cabin, flight attendants had completed their final checks and taken their own seats, bracing for landing. Through the windows, passengers could now see they were approaching Denver rather than San Francisco, the reality of their diverted flight fully apparent. Lisa closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer for everyone aboard. For the sick captain, for the first officer, for her remarkable son who had somehow found himself in the middle of this crisis. 200 feet, Michael continued, his eyes darting between the instruments and the approaching runway. Sync rate normal. Chen was fully focused now, her hands steady on the controls as she guided the massive aircraft through the final moments of flight. The engine's sound changed as she brought back the throttles, allowing the plane to settle toward the runway. 100 feet. Michael's voice remained calm. 50. 40. 30. The runway rushed beneath them, the white center line, perfectly aligned with the aircraft's nose despite the gusting crosswind. Chen made one final adjustment, then began the landing flare, bringing the nose up slightly to slow their descent. 20, 10. The main landing gear touched down with a chirp of rubber on concrete, followed quickly by the nose gear. Chen immediately deployed the thrust reversers, and the engine's roar increased as they helped slow the aircraft. The plane shuddered as she applied the brakes, gradually bleeding off their speed. "We're down," Michael breathed, a hint of awe in his voice despite everything he'd just been through. Chen didn't respond immediately, her focus still on bringing the aircraft to a safe stop. Only when they had slowed to taxi speed and turned off the active runway did she let out a long breath. "Nice work, Michael," she said finally, genuine appreciation in her voice. "Really nice work." Outside, emergency vehicles were already moving to intercept them, lights flashing. Chen guided the aircraft to a designated area away from the terminal buildings where medical personnel could board quickly. Denver ground, Flight 2187, clear of runway 26R, proceeding to emergency parking as directed, she reported, then added, "Request immediate medical assistance for the captain." "Flight 2187, medical team is standing by. Follow the lead vehicle to your parking position." As they taxied toward their stopping point, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in for Michael. He had just helped land a commercial airliner with 183 passengers aboard. His hands, which had been perfectly steady throughout the emergency, now trembled slightly. "Are you okay?" Chen asked, noticing his reaction. Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am, it's just different from the simulator." A brief smile flickered across Chen's tired face. That's the understatement of the year. As the aircraft came to its final stop, Chen shut down the engines and completed the essential post-flight checklist. Emergency personnel were already approaching the aircraft. Within minutes, they would board to attend to Captain Reynolds. "What happens now?" Michael asked quietly. "Now," Chen said, removing her headset, "you go back to being a 12-year-old kid and I tell everyone what an incredible thing you just did." The main cabin door opened and paramedics rushed aboard with a stretcher and medical equipment. The lead flight attendant, Daniel, directed them to the cockpit, while other crew members began preparing passengers for disembarkation. In the cabin, the passengers had erupted into applause and cheers when the plane landed safely. The relief was overwhelming, washing through the aircraft like a physical wave. People hugged each other, even strangers, bound by their shared experience and gratitude for their safe arrival. Lisa unbuckled her seatbelt with shaking hands, desperate to get to her son. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, she was on her feet, pushing toward the front of the plane against the tide of shifting passengers and cabin crew. "Please, my son is in the cockpit," she explained repeatedly as she made her way forward. At the same time, Michael emerged from the cockpit, escorted by First Officer Chen. When Lisa saw him, she rushed forward and wrapped him in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Michael, are you okay? I was so worried," Michael returned, his mother's embrace suddenly feeling very much like a 12-year-old again after the intensity of the cockpit. "I'm okay, Mom. Really." Chen watched the reunion with a tired smile. "Mrs. Turner," she said when Lisa finally loosened her grip on her son, "you should be incredibly proud. Your son was remarkable up there." Lisa looked from Chen to Michael, her eyes still glistening with tears. "What exactly did he do?" "He kept his head when most adults would have panicked," Chen explained. "He monitored instruments, handled communications with air traffic control, and kept track of our approach path. I couldn't have managed as well without him." As they spoke, the medical team was carefully moving Captain Reynolds onto a stretcher. He was now conscious but groggy, an oxygen mask over his face. As they carried him past, he reached out a weak hand toward Chen. How? How did we land? He asked, his voice barely audible. Chen smiled and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. We had some unexpected help, Tom. I'll tell you all about it once you're feeling better. The paramedics continued carrying Captain Reynolds toward the exit as passengers watched in hushed respect. The gravity of the situation finally clear to everyone aboard. This wasn't just a minor medical issue. The captain of their flight had suffered a serious medical emergency while flying the plane. And somehow, a 12-year-old boy had helped bring them safely to the ground. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The passengers of Flight 2187 were escorted to a special area of Denver International Airport, where airline representatives provided food, drinks, and information about continuing their journeys. Some would be rebooked on flights later that day, while others would need to stay overnight in Denver. Michael and his mother sat in a quiet corner of the airport lounge, somewhat separated from the other passengers. An airline manager had arranged this private space for them, recognizing that Michael's situation was unique. Lisa held a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, while Michael sipped on his second hot chocolate. I still can't believe it, Lisa said, shaking her head for perhaps the 20th time that afternoon. My 12-year-old son helped land a commercial airplane. Michael looked down at his drink, suddenly shy about his role in the emergency. First Officer Chen did the actual flying. I just helped with some stuff. Before Lisa could respond, the lounge door opened, and two men in airline uniforms entered. One was the flight manager they'd spoken to earlier, but the other was new, a tall man with silver hair and the 4 stripes of a senior captain on his shoulders. Mrs. Turner, Michael, the manager said. This is Captain William Peterson, the chief pilot for the airline's Western region. He'd like to speak with you both. Captain Peterson approached with a warm smile and extended his hand first to Lisa, then to Michael. It's an honor to meet you both. I've just been briefed on what happened on Flight 2187. Lisa shook his hand, still looking somewhat dazed. Thank you. How's Captain Reynolds doing? We've been worried about him. He's stable and receiving excellent care at University Hospital, Peterson replied. The doctors believe he suffered a major heart attack, but thanks to the quick response and emergency landing, his prognosis is good. He turned his attention to Michael. And I understand we have you to thank for helping with that landing. Michael's cheeks flushed. I just did what First Officer Chen asked me to do. Captain Peterson pulled up a chair and sat down across from them. First Officer Chen has given me her full report, he said, his voice carrying both authority and kindness. She says you demonstrated knowledge and composure that she's rarely seen even in professional pilots. My uncle taught me, Michael explained. He's a flight instructor. We use simulators. Peterson nodded. So I understand. Nevertheless, what you did was extraordinary. Most adults would have frozen up in that situation, but you kept your head and provided critical assistance during an emergency. The lounge door opened again, and First Officer Chen entered, still in her uniform but without her tie and cap. She looked tired but smiled when she saw Michael. There's my unexpected co-pilot, she said, walking over to join them. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Michael replied, brightening at seeing her. How about you? Better now that I've had a chance to catch my breath. She sat down beside Captain Peterson. I've just finished the incident paperwork, all very standard procedure after an emergency landing. Did I get you in trouble? Michael asked, suddenly concerned. For letting me in the cockpit? Chen exchanged a glance with Captain Peterson before answering. No, not at all. While it's certainly unusual to have a non-crew member in the cockpit during an emergency, the circumstances were exceptional. You helped save lives today, Michael. Captain Peterson nodded in agreement. The airline fully supports First Officer Chen's decision. In an emergency situation, the pilot in command has authority to take whatever actions are necessary to ensure the safety of the flight. He leaned forward, his expression serious. And, to be perfectly clear, what you did today was heroic. Michael looked down at his hands, uncomfortable with the praise. I was just trying to help. Lisa reached over and squeezed her son's shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. That's who he is, she told the pilots, always trying to help others. But I never imagined his airplane obsession would lead to something like this. Speaking of your interest in aviation, Captain Peterson said, I understand from your mother that you're heading to San Francisco to visit family. Michael nodded. My aunt lives there. We were going to stay for 2 weeks. Well, we'll certainly get you there, Peterson assured them. But before that happens, there are a few people who would like to meet you. The story of what happened on Flight 2187 has gotten out. Lisa looked alarmed. What do you mean, gotten out? Chen pulled out her phone and showed them a news website. The headline read, 12-year-old boy helps land commercial airliner after pilot emergency. How did they find out so quickly? Lisa asked, taking the phone to read more. Passengers were posting about it on social media before the plane even reached the gate, Chen explained. Several mentioned a young boy being escorted to the cockpit during the emergency, and things spread from there. Our corporate communications team confirmed the basic facts to prevent misinformation, but they've protected your privacy. There are already reporters outside the airport waiting for a statement, Captain Peterson added. The airline can handle all communications if you prefer to remain private, but I wanted you to be aware of the situation. Lisa looked overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Michael is just a child. I don't want him to become some media spectacle. I completely understand, Peterson nodded. However, there is something else to consider. What Michael did today is inspiring. It's the kind of positive story that people need to hear. It shows that ordinary people, even young people, can do extraordinary things when called upon. Michael had been quiet during this exchange, but now he looked up. Would it help Captain Reynolds if I talked to the reporters? I'd like people to know how good First Officer Chen was. She's the real hero. Chen smiled at him. That's very kind, Michael, but this isn't about me. Captain Peterson is right. Your story could inspire others, but it's entirely your decision and your mom's. No pressure either way. Lisa looked at her son thoughtfully. Michael had always been a quiet, somewhat shy child, more comfortable with his airplane books and simulator programs than with being the center of attention. But today, he had shown a side of himself that perhaps even he hadn't fully known existed. What do you want to do, Michael? She asked gently. Michael considered the question carefully. I think Uncle Ray would want me to tell people what happened. He always says that sharing knowledge is important. Captain Peterson nodded. If you're comfortable with it, the airline can arrange a brief press conference. We'll have someone with you the entire time to make sure things don't get overwhelming. Could First Officer Chen be there too? Michael asked. I don't want people to think I landed the plane by myself or something. Of course, Chen agreed immediately. We're a team, after all. The press conference was arranged for later that afternoon in a conference room at the airport hotel. The airline's media relations team prepared Michael and First Officer Chen, explaining what to expect and reassuring them that they could end the session at any point if they felt uncomfortable. Michael changed into clean clothes that the airline had provided, his previous outfit having become somewhat rumpled during the long, stressful day. As he buttoned up the new shirt, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and barely recognized the serious-faced boy looking back at him. Ready? Lisa asked, straightening his collar. I think so, Michael replied. Will you be there? Right, in the front row, she promised. And so proud of you I might burst. The conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, and airline officials when they entered. Michael faltered slightly at the sight of so many strangers, all focused on him, but First Officer Chen placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Just be yourself, she whispered. That's what got us through today. They took their seats at a table at the front of the room. A spokesperson from the airline made a brief statement explaining the emergency on Flight 2187 and introducing First Officer Chen and a very special young passenger who provided assistance during the crisis. Then it was time for questions. Reporters were respectful but eager to hear the full story. First Officer Chen, one asked, can you tell us what happened when Captain Reynolds became ill? Chen described the emergency calmly and professionally, explaining how she had needed assistance in the cockpit while managing both flying duties and communications. And that's when Michael stepped in. she concluded, gesturing to the boy beside her. His knowledge of aviation procedures was remarkable, especially for someone his age. Another reporter directed a question to Michael. "Were you scared when you were asked to help in the cockpit?" Michael leaned toward the microphone, his voice initially quiet, but growing stronger as he spoke. "Not really scared, no. It felt a lot like the flight simulators I practice on with my uncle. Everything looked familiar, just more real." "What exactly did you do to help land the plane?" another reporter asked. Michael glanced at Chen before answering. "I didn't land the plane. First Officer Chen did that. She's an amazing pilot. I just helped with monitoring the instruments and handling some of the radio communication so she could concentrate on flying." His humble response drew appreciative smiles from the assembled journalists and airline officials. "Michael," called out another reporter, "how does it feel to be called a hero?" The question seemed to catch Michael off guard. He frowned slightly, considering his answer. "I don't think I'm a hero," he said finally. "I just knew something about planes because my uncle taught me. First Officer Chen is the real hero. She stayed calm and did her job perfectly even though her captain was sick and she had to land in bad weather. And the medical people who helped Captain Reynolds, they're heroes too." Chen smiled at his response, clearly touched by his words. "If I may add something," she said, leaning toward her microphone. "In aviation, we have a saying, aviate, navigate, communicate. These are the priorities in any emergency. Michael's assistance with the navigate and communicate parts allowed me to focus on aviating, actually flying the aircraft. His contribution was significant and directly contributed to the safe outcome of this flight." As the press conference continued, Michael gradually became more comfortable answering questions. He explained his passion for aviation, how his uncle had nurtured this interest through simulator training, and his hope to become a pilot himself someday. Watching from the front row, Lisa felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in her sons, composure and maturity, amazement at the unexpected turn their simple trip had taken, and a new appreciation for Michael's aviation obsession that she had sometimes worried was taking too much of his time. The airline spokesperson eventually brought the session to a close, thanking everyone for coming and announcing that Flight 27's passengers would be continuing to their destination on a special flight that evening. As they left the conference room, Captain Peterson approached them again. "You did wonderfully, Michael. Very poised and articulate." He exchanged a glance with another airline official beside him, then continued. "We have something we'd like to discuss with you and your mother if you have a few more minutes." Michael and his mother followed Captain Peterson to a quiet conference room away from the media frenzy. The room had a large window overlooking the airport tarmac, where planes took off and landed in the late afternoon sun. For a moment, Michael was distracted by a Boeing 797 taxiing to its gate, its massive engine still spinning down. "Please have a seat." Captain Peterson gestured to the comfortable chairs around a polished table. Lisa and Michael sat down, both looking curious and a little tired from the day's events. Another airline official joined them, introducing herself as Patricia Winters, the Director of Flight Operations for the Western region. "First of all," Winters began, "I want to personally thank you, Michael, for your assistance today. What you did was truly remarkable." Michael shifted in his seat. "Thank you, ma'am. We've been discussing how the airline should respond to this situation," she continued. "It's quite unprecedented, as I'm sure you can imagine." Lisa placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "What do you mean by respond?" Captain Peterson smiled reassuringly. "Only good things, Mrs. Turner, I promise. The company wants to show its appreciation in a meaningful way." Winters nodded. "We've put together a package that we hope you'll find appropriate. First, we'd like to upgrade you both to first class for your continuing flight to San Francisco this evening and for your return trip home." "That's very kind," Lisa said, "but not necessary." "Additionally," Winters continued, "we'd like to present Michael with a scholarship fund for future flight training, should he decide to pursue aviation as a career. The fund would cover the full cost of flight school from private pilot's license all the way through commercial certification. Michael's eyes widened. Really? A real flight school? Not just simulators? A real flight school, Peterson confirmed with a smile. Starting when you're old enough, of course. In the meantime, we'd like to offer you access to our professional grade flight simulators for training whenever you want it. The same ones our pilots train on. Lisa looked stunned. That's incredibly generous. I don't know what to say. There's more, Winters added. We've also arranged for you to meet with Captain Reynolds once he's recovered enough for visitors. He's asked to thank you personally. Michael had been quiet, trying to process everything, but now he spoke up. How is he doing? Captain Reynolds? Better than expected, Peterson replied. The doctors say he'll need bypass surgery, but his prognosis is good. If the plane hadn't landed so quickly, he left the sentence unfinished, but everyone understood the implication. Winters handed Lisa a folder. All the details of the scholarship and other arrangements are in here. There's no pressure to decide anything immediately. Thank you, Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. This is overwhelming, but in the best possible way. One last thing, Peterson said. We've been absolutely flooded with media requests for interviews with Michael. Everyone from national morning shows to documentary filmmakers. Again, there's no obligation, but if you're interested in any of them, our media relations team can help manage those requests. Lisa looked at Michael. What do you think, honey? It's a lot of attention. Michael thought for a moment. Would I be able to talk about how important flight training is? And maybe encourage other kids to learn about aviation? Peterson smiled. Absolutely, that would be a wonderful message. Then I think maybe a few interviews would be okay, Michael decided. As long as Mom is with me. Of course, Winters agreed. We'll make sure everything is handled appropriately considering your age. As they wrapped up the meeting, Michael had one more question. Will I get to see First Officer Chen again? Actually, Peterson replied, checking his watch. She'll be the first officer on your flight to San Francisco tonight. She specifically requested to continue the journey with you. Michael's face lit up at this news. The connection he'd formed with Chen during those intense minutes in the cockpit was special. A bond forged in crisis that few could understand. 3 hours later, Michael and Lisa were settled in first class aboard a new aircraft bound for San Francisco. The other passengers from Flight 2187 were also aboard, many of them recognizing Michael and stopping to thank him or shake his hand as they boarded. Some had already seen the news coverage of the press conference. First Officer Chen, true to Captain Peterson's word, was part of the crew. She'd come to greet Michael before takeoff, this time under much happier circumstances. How are you feeling? She asked him. Ready for another flight? Definitely, Michael replied with a grin. This one will be less exciting though, right? Chen laughed. That's the plan. Boring flights are the best flights in our business. As Chen returned to the cockpit for pre-flight preparations, the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and making a special mention of our young aviation expert in seat 2A. The other passengers applauded, and Michael sank lower in his seat, both pleased and embarrassed by the attention. Lisa squeezed his hand. You okay? Michael nodded. Just feels weird. I didn't do anything special. I just knew some stuff about planes. Sometimes, Lisa said thoughtfully. Being in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge is all it takes to make a difference. The flight to San Francisco was indeed uneventful, much to everyone's relief. As they began their descent into the Bay Area, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars, Michael watched the cockpit door with interest. Do you think they'd let me visit the cockpit after we land? He asked his mother. I have a feeling they might make an exception for you, Lisa replied with a smile. Sure enough, after a perfect landing and taxi to the gate, First Officer Chen appeared and invited Michael to come forward. In the cockpit, the captain, a veteran pilot named Robert Thompson, shook Michael's hand warmly. First Officer Chen has told me all about your adventure today, Captain Thompson said. I'm impressed. Not many adults would have kept their cool the way you did. Thank you, sir, Michael replied, his eyes roaming over the instrument panel. noting the differences between this aircraft and the one he'd helped land in Denver. Chen noticed his interest. Similar but not identical to this morning's plane, right? Michael nodded. This one has the updated glass cockpit system, and the throttle quadrant is slightly different. The pilots exchanged impressed glances. You really do know your stuff, Thompson remarked. After saying goodbye to the flight crew, Michael and Lisa made their way through the terminal where Lisa's sister Patricia was waiting to greet them, having already heard about their extraordinary day from news reports. "There's my celebrity nephew," she exclaimed, wrapping Michael in a tight hug. "When you said you were interested in planes, I never thought you'd be helping to land one before you even got your driver's license." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Michael's story had captured the public's imagination, and while he and his mother tried to maintain some normalcy during their vacation, there were constant reminders of his newfound fame. People recognized him in restaurants and on the street, local news stations requested interviews, and his social media accounts, managed carefully by his mother, gained thousands of followers overnight. "It's so strange," Michael confessed to his aunt one evening as they sat on her deck overlooking San Francisco Bay. "Last week nobody knew who I was. Now people want my autograph." "Fame is like that," Patricia replied wisely. "The question is, what will you do with it?" Michael had been thinking about that very question. The airline's scholarship offer had opened up possibilities that had previously seemed like distant dreams. Now, becoming a pilot wasn't just a childhood fantasy. It was a real path forward. A week into their stay, they received word that Captain Reynolds was well enough for visitors. The airline arranged for Michael and Lisa to visit him at the hospital in Denver during their return journey. Walking into the hospital room, Michael felt suddenly shy. Captain Reynolds was sitting up in bed looking pale but alert. His wife was at his bedside and she smiled warmly as they entered. "So you're the young man who helped save my husband's life," she said, standing to greet them. Captain Reynolds extended his hand. "Michael, it's good to finally meet you properly. Last time I saw you, things were a bit hazy." Michael shook his hand carefully, mindful of the IV line. "How are you feeling, sir?" "Better every day," Reynolds replied. "The doctors say I should make a full recovery, thanks in large part to how quickly we got on the ground." He paused, his expression becoming serious. "First Officer Chen told me everything you did. I've been flying for 15 years and I've never heard of anything like it." "I just helped a little," Michael said. "From what I hear, it was more than a little," Reynolds countered. "Chen says you handled communications with air traffic control, monitored our approach path, and kept track of weather conditions. That's not helping a little. That's being an essential part of the flight crew." Michael didn't know how to respond to such praise from a professional pilot. "The thing is," Reynolds continued, "flying is about more than just knowing procedures or how to operate equipment. It's about keeping your head in a crisis. Not everyone can do that, even with years of training." He looked Michael in the eye. "You have a gift, young man. I hope you'll consider developing it." "I will," Michael promised. "The airline offered me a scholarship for flight school when I'm older." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Good. The industry needs people like you." As they prepared to leave, Reynolds handed Michael a small box. "A little something to remember the experience by," he explained. Inside was a pair of pilot's wings, not the plastic ones given to children who visit the cockpit, but real metal wings, like those worn by actual pilots. "These were my first pair," Reynolds said. "I'd like you to have them." Michael held the wings carefully, deeply moved by the gesture. "Thank you, sir. I'll take good care of them." On the flight home from San Francisco, Michael sat quietly by the window, the small box with Reynolds' wings safely tucked in his pocket. He watched the clouds pass below, thinking about everything that had happened and what might lie ahead. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Lisa asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about what Uncle Ray always says," Michael replied. "About how life puts you exactly where you need to be sometimes." Lisa smiled. "Your uncle is a wise man." "And I was thinking about something else too," Michael added, his expression serious beyond his years. When I was in that cockpit helping First Officer Chen, I felt, I don't know, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Does that make sense? Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand. Perfect sense. I think you found your calling, Michael. Some people search their whole lives and never find it. Michael smiled and turned back to the window, watching as the plane began its descent toward home. The pilot's wings in his pocket felt like a promise, not just of future adventures in the sky, but of a life where knowledge, courage, and being in the right place at the right time could make all the difference. In the world,